All right, yeah. On Friday, I know y'all started looking over Jamestown and some of the conflicts and struggles that came with the early years in English settlement there. Does anybody know when Jamestown was founded? Remember that from Friday? 1607. All right, cool. May 14, 1607. But yeah, these opening years were extremely difficult for the settlers, and it came upon some desperate times. So we're going to check out this video and then read the article and look at some stuff that they went through in those early years.
Archaeologists appear to have solved a 400-year-old mystery that goes back to America's roots. It's a startling discovery about the way some early settlers apparently survived a very brutal winter while others starved. CNN's Lisa Sylvester has the story.
They came by ship with their hopes. Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement in North America in 1607. It was long believed that James Fort on the island had over time washed away. But in 1994, archaeologists working in the area started finding the remains of the original fort. And then something even more astounding was discovered last year. Archaeologists say this skull belonged to a 14-year-old girl of European descent. This is what they believe she looked like. They are calling her Jane. She was on board a ship that arrived in 1609. It couldn't have been at a worse time. The food supplies they were bringing from England were lost or spoiled in a severe storm, and tensions were high between the Powhatan Indians and the settlers.
The fort is cut off, it's besieged by the Powhatans, and these 300 men, women and children are trapped within the confines of the fort itself.
For hundreds of years, it's been a mystery. How did the settlers survive? They had only enough food to last 2 months, just as winter was setting in. A winter known as the starving time of Jamestown. No food, disease, and war.
In the records, there were accounts of the fact that when things were so desperate and very hopeless for the colonists that they some resorted to cannibalism. But they were kind of enigmatic references. Some believed it, some didn't.
But now they say they have evidence, the skull. It was found in an abandoned cellar of the fort. Douglas Osley is a world-famous forensic anthropologist. He says the cuts on Jane's jaw were from a very sharp knife, consistent with efforts to remove flesh, consistent with cannibalism.
I can tell you the violence is, in terms of the mutilation of the bones, the fracturing, there's no way that this is just trauma. They have a very clear intent, and the clear intent in this instance is the need to remove tissues for consumption.
This discovery really, to me, has made such an impact on my empathy with the hardships that the settlers went through for that time period and how close Jamestown came to failing. If it failed, of course, American history would be very different.
November of 1609, there were 300 settlers. By the time more provisions arrived the following spring, there were only 60 settlers left.
A new exhibition telling Jane's story and the fate of the settlers opens tomorrow in Jamestown, Virginia. Historians and anthropologists, they are now trying to find out Jane's true identity.
Yeah, as you can see in the video, things got real during this what they call a starving winter of 1609. Food supplies were incredibly low, and people resorted to pretty desperate measures, as you can see. Good old cannibalism. It's always fun. Want to start out reading this article over here, Hannah?
The winter of 1609 to 1610 was treacherous for early American settlers. Some 240 of the 300 colonists of Jamestown in Virginia died during this period called starving time, when they were under siege and had no way to defend. Desperate times led to desperate measures. New evidence suggests that includes eating the flesh of fellow colonists who have already died.
All right, we'll go, Colin.
Archaeologists revealed Wednesday their analysis of 17th century skeletal remains suggesting that settlers practiced cannibalism. Researchers unearthed an incomplete human skull and tibia shin bone in 2012 that contained several features suggesting that this particular person had been cannibalized. The remains come from a 14-year-old girl of English origin who
archaeologists at the Jamestown Rediscovery Project said at a briefing Wednesday that the fort was built in 1607 but has been washed away. Kelso and colleagues began digging in 1994 and have been excavating the site on Jamestown Island ever since.
So they've been working on this for 20 years now, and just last year when this article came out, like they said, they never knew how these people even survived, which ones did actually survive. I mean, they started out 300 and they only ended up with 60. And so now they figured out how even those 60 were able to survive. Which by doing some pretty drastic things. You want to keep going? Right here?
Owsley and colleagues can tell quite a bit about what happened in James when at least one starving sailor in the fort apparently tried to feed on all of her. If it's any consolation, it appears that she was already dead.
Yeah.
Researchers say it looks like someone had tried but failed to open his skull with 4 shallow drops to the forehead. The back of the skull contains markings that could have been made by a small hatchet or cleaver striking it. The cranium cracked open from the last hit. Forensic experts say it appears the person struck the skull with lightning.
So at least she was already dead before they started taking bites out of her. But you want to do that next paragraph there, Julia?
The skull's mandible contains cuts all over it and inside, which experts say reflect an attempt to take tissue off of the face and throw it with a tool such as a knife. The cheek area reflects the sawing action of a tool going back and forth, Owsley said. There are also sharp passages of the knife.
All right, Caleb.
At some point in the process, the head was removed, Owsley said. The damage done to these remains indicates that whoever inflicted it was not a skilled butcher, he said. Instead, what we see is hesitancy, trial, tentativeness, and an absolute total lack of experience. The shin bone that archaeologists recovered also appeared to have been chopped, but in a way that more resembles classic butchering techniques, Owsley said.
Okay. Maddie, sorry, Julia?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
The person doing this was clearly interested and based on what would have been accepted. Cuisine in the 17th century in sheep meat. Muscles of the face, that area, and tongue, and also in terms of 17th century traditional cuts would also include the brain, he said.
You want to get that last paragraph? Yasmin?
It is possible that more than one person was involved in this, given the disparity in butchering practices seen with the head compared to the shin bone.
All right, good. Yeah, so what can studying James remains tell us about how life got during these times for the settlers?
Really bad.
What?
They're really bad.
Yeah, I mean, stuff is pretty difficult. It just shows how powerful hunger can be in desperate times, and what lengths that some people are willing to go to survive when it comes down to it. All right, you want to keep going, Jesse?
In the summer of 1609, the settlers experienced 2 significant setbacks, said James Horn, Vice President of Research and Historical Interpretation at Colonial in Williamsburg. The first was that a large fleet bringing supplies and settlers to Virginia was scattered. It had been carrying 500 settlers from Plymouth along with provisions. The fleet
Haley?
The fleet represented a new beginning for Jamestown, which had struggled over the previous 2 years, Horn said. A hurricane scattered the ships a week before they were supposed to arrive. The flagship with the leaders of this pack ended up in Bermuda. Shakespeare's play The Tempest takes its inspiration from this event.
6 ships researched Jamestown in August 1609, with spoiled or depleted fleet, and many settlers in poor health. On one of those ships was Jane, Horn said. At the same time, the relationship between the Jamestown colonists and the native black Indians had broken down. The existing settlers were already experiencing disease and a shortage of food, and the demands they made on the crown strained their relations.
Yeah, I want you to pay attention to some of these factors that just happen at the same time. It really just added to the strain that was on these settlers and ended up making them do what they did. Like the hurricane and the siege by the Powhatans, and they surrounded the settlement and they couldn't get out to get any food or anything. they were stuck and had to rely on what was within, because they would get killed if they left. You keep going, Morgan?
That was an environment into which 300 additional settlers arrived at the James Fort. One of the leaders of the group, Captain John Smith, the same one who was famously friends with the Amish, returned to England in October 1609 because he was murdered. Osley said, leaving a leadership vacuum. In the fall, the Pilgrims waged war against these colonists and launched a siege against the fort.
All right, John.
With no way to get food from the outside world, the colonists resorted to eating horses, dogs, cats, rats, mice, and snakes. Moore said, according to the accounts of George Percy, who was the president of Jamestown during this time, there are even accounts of people eating their shoes and any other leather that could be found. Anyone who was out to try to scrounge for roots in the woods was killed by Palatines.
And this is not the only time in American history or world history, for that matter, that people have resorted to cannibalism in times of desperation. Y'all learn a little bit later on in American history that during westward expansion, there was a family that was called the Donner Party that were trying to make it west and got trapped by a blizzard and ended up eating each other there. So I mean, it's not an isolated occurrence that this was going on in Jamestown. Zach?
Percy wrote, according to the Smithsonian, that nothing was spared to maintain life and to do those things which seem incredible, as to dig up dead corpses out of the graves and to eat them. And some have licked up the blood which hath fallen from their weak fellows, in other words, cannibalism. It's not clear how many deceased colonists were cannibalized. Only 60 out of 300 of the original colonists survived, described as looking like skeletons, Form 7.
All right, President.
In May of 1610, the settlers finally arrived who had been shipwrecked in Bermuda, effectively saving the colony. Lord Delaware brought even more colonists and enough provisions to last a year. There are still more pits at the fort to be excavated, and only 10% of Jim's body has been recovered, also said.
All right, Jack, let me finish this up.
There are many other examples, and we said whether that will be found with archaeology, we'll never know. It's going to be under the next shuttle.
Last paragraph there. Yeah, so can y'all, over those factors that led into this going on in the colony, in the settlement? Yeah, seized by the Palatines, they cut off their food supplies, and then what else? What was the other one that we mentioned? Yeah, the hurricane. Because there was supplies on the way and other settlers that were coming for aid, and they ended up all the way in Bermuda. And so that, along with, I think a big factor was also the absence of John Smith. He got injured and was back in England at the time, and without a vacuum, or not a leadership vacuum, without a leader in this in situations like this, there's really that's how this stuff happens. If there's nobody to pull people together and keep them working together, then people